service leader. I am joined by Jeremy Jonczyk, who is serving double duty as our musician and is on AV. Today, we welcome back Reverend Tina Simson, who will shepherd us to our new Soul Matters theme for the month of April, Awakenings. Welcome all members, friends, and visitors to UU of East Aurora. We are a community in which all people are welcomed, regardless of belief, ethnicities, race, gender, sexual orientation, or economic standing. Welcome to a safe place. We have resumed coffee hour and singing. Please join us after the service in the gathering room for coffee hour. And now, please take a moment to greet the person next to you. Before we begin, are there any announcements? Does Mary have an announcement?
Good morning, everybody. In solidarity with members with what's happening in Ukraine, we have the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee who is doing work there. I know East Aurora is also doing a fundraiser for the World Food Kitchen today, actually, on Elm and Oakwood. But I will say that if some of you already have these hearts on your houses, we brought some here today. These are free. There's no obligation to donate to UUSC, although UUEA would be very happy if you donated to UUSC. The only requirement or request is that you do show support for Ukraine in some way. So the hearts are here. You can grab one on your way out. The other announcement I have is about a justice initiative that's starting in May. We will be working, the church, UUEA, will work with ACES, which is the climate and environment group here in East Aurora, to help promote a no-mow May, to help promote pollinator habitat. So that's coming. We'll tell you more about that, but just a heads up, we're going to ask you to grow some weeds in May.
Thank you, Mary. Are there any other announcements? Okay. I begin this service by acknowledging that our nation was largely built on the ancestral land of Native nations and the labor of enslaved peoples. May we persevere to achieve a clear understanding of our shared past and utilize these lessons learned for good and for progress. And now the Prelude Spring Song by Felix Mendelssohn will be played by Jeremy Jonczyk.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. And now we'll be doing the chalice lighting. Please join me in reading together the words that are printed on your order of service. We gather this hour as people of faith, with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning in celebration of the life we share together. And now for our opening words, we turn to Reverend Tina.
Good morning. It's always a pleasure to be here. In the past couple of days, a few things have happened to me that made me kind of think the universe is conspiring to tell me something. Now, I don't believe that the universe talks, and I don't even believe that it conspires on my behalf. But yesterday, I was sitting at home reading in my living room when someone rang the doorbell. I went to the door and there was this adorable, young, freshly scrubbed teenager. And she handed me a pamphlet and she said, "Do you know if you're going to heaven or hell?" And I thought, well, I hadn't thought about it so far today. And I took the pamphlet because, you know, she was holding it out in her hand. And I just sort of glanced at it. There was a lovely picture of Jesus. And I said, well, you know, I'm a minister. And I started to hand it back to her. And she looked at me like, you're what? And then I realized that there's some faith traditions where women are not ordained. And I said, well, I'm a pastor of a large church, which is kind of a lie because I'm not anymore. And I thought, uh-oh, the barometer just went in the wrong direction. And I handed her back the pamphlet because I didn't want to waste her paper. And I said, you know, I think I'm covered. And she just said, okay. And I thanked her for coming, and we said goodbye, and she left. And then I was driving down Route 90, coming here this morning. And as I was driving, there was a great big billboard behind an equally big barn. And it said, "Where are you going?" And I thought, I'm going to church. Where are we going? And then as I got closer, the barn kind of faded away, and I could see a little bit more of the billboard, and it said, "Where are you going, heaven or hell?" And as I went a little bit farther, the whole billboard kind of came into my vision, and it said, "Where are you going, heaven or hell? For truth, call this number." I thought, oh wow, you get to call a number and find out. I mean, I understand GPS can follow my car, but you know, I thought maybe there's some celestial barometer up there, and it's just kind of waiting, you know, where my behavior goes. And I thought, okay, well, if I'm in the middle of this barometer, these are the things you think of as you're driving from Rochester to Buffalo in the snow in April. I could move the barometer over to this side toward heaven if I'm really, really nice tomorrow, right? Or maybe, you know, I could be really nasty and angry and mean to people, and then my barometer would go in the other direction. So maybe this call for truth, this number wasn't really going to work for me. And then I thought, okay, maybe I just need to tell you all that it's not about the reward at the end of the journey. It's not about what we do in order to get the reward that's offered by heaven or the punishment of hell. If you're Unitarian Universalist, the journey is the important part. What we do every day, how we care for one another, how we care for all beings on this earth, that's the journey that's important. That's what the barometer is going to say. And it's inside us, friends. It's not anywhere in any celestial GPS. The barometer is in your heart. And that's why we come to church, to remember the barometer and to remember how we serve one another, and that, in fact, is the truth. Welcome to our celebration of life. As always, it's a delight to be with you this morning.
Thank you, Reverend Tina. We are reminded that UUEA cannot do anything without members and friends showing up and supporting each other. Sincere thanks to those who participate in events, volunteer their time, share their talents, or who are in a position to be generous. If you are inclined to give after the service, there is a plate in the bookshelf, or you may do so online at uuea.org. And now Jeremy will play our offertory hymn, Spirit of Life. And now for today's reading. This is What Grows After the Fire by Wayne Miller. What is it the earth does after a fire, after a death? It creates life. It refuses to do any less. This is what the earth does. This is what we do. This is what our hearts do. They resurrect, rise from the ash and death, and offer seeds, new hope, new possibilities. All life depends on the absolute truth of this one thing. Whatever burns, whatever is taken, life fills the vacuum with immediate sufficiency. Without planting, without planning or tending, it grows, fresh, green, and new. We too are made of this. Like the earth, we create life. We cannot stop it. We are not in charge of making it happen. When we learn this, when we finally realize who we are, what we know, and of what we are capable, any fear of never having enough of anything gradually and inevitably falls away. Then, if we look anywhere, we find an impossible, unreasonable sea of green. And now for our program. Reverend Tina Simson is an interfaith minister, ordained through One Spirit Interfaith Seminary and certified in spiritual counseling. She is an associate member of the Unitarian Universalist Ministers Association. She has a spiritual counseling practice and advocates for the well-being of children through the Children's Agenda Interfaith Collaborative. Tina also served for 8 years as the First Unitarian Church of Rochester, New York, as Minister of Spiritual Development and Pastoral Care. She retired in June 2018. Tina travels this life with her soulmate Joe, her children, abundant grandchildren, and her dog Roscoe. Here is Reverend Tina.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you, Jeremy, for such beautiful, beautiful music. When I realized that this month's worship theme, our Soul Matters worship theme here at UUEA, was awakening, well, I figured I got this one. It's spring, the season of awakening, well, sort of. And you see, I'm a gardener. I love dirt. I love the feel of it. I love the smell of it. I love it when it's dry and dusty. I love it when it's warm and moist in the summer sun, and I even love it when it's soggy and cold, like it is today. When I put my shovel into the ground and I find earthworms making more dirt, I marvel at their very existence. What an awesome responsibility they have. I even go through withdrawal. You know, in February, when the smell of snow kind of gets really old, I crave the fragrance of spring mode. When the pandemic lockdown hit in March of 2020 and everything was uncertain and frightening, Joe and I were concerned that we wouldn't be able to get flowers to scatter about our garden, and we wouldn't have herbs or tomatoes. So for the first time ever, we got seeds and seed pods filled with dirt, and we scattered them all over the kitchen table and the kitchen counter where the sun comes in the best. Our promise, no matter what happened, there would be tomatoes and herbs and flowers at our house. The smell of dirt as I watered the pods each morning brought me back to who I was and how I was connected to the world and to my God. Unable to see family or friends or my abundant grandchildren, Joe and I had each other, and we had dirt, and we had hope, and we had the awakening of spring. Now, I started gardening about 32 years ago, very soon after my mom passed away. I was in my early 30s, raising kids and trying to find my way in life after she died way too soon, as far as I was concerned. You see, she was a gardener too. I remember when I was little, she had this rock garden on a scrappy patch of dirt in our backyard, and she would spend hours out there. She created beauty in unexpected places. Flowers bloomed all summer, and birds would flock to her plastic bird bath. She even had plastic gnomes. I kid you not. It seemed as if she retreated there when life got challenging for her, and my brother and I knew it was a good idea to leave her be. My mom suffered from a long illness, and as she grew older, she lost her ability to garden outside. But when she died, her house was filled with potted plants. She made this habit of collecting any plant that needed her tender attention from any doctor's office we visited. She made a habit of eyeing the plant, and then she'd talk to the office administrator, and she'd convince them to let her take the plant home and nurse it back to health. She'd nurse them with a little bit of tender, loving care. She promised to bring them back to the doctor's office, but she seldom did. They just joined the jungle that became her house. As my mom's life faded, I watched her focus shift to the life of her plants. She knew she wouldn't live long, but her plants could. And looking back now, I can see how her approach to gardening gave her strength to face her own limitations, and it awakened hope for the future she would not see. When she died in December of 1990, her last words to me were, "Honey, water the plants." Really. So I took it to heart. I started a garden in my own home, and when I left that house after 20 years of gardening, I had a shade garden and a sun garden. I had perennials that would bloom from spring, early spring, through November. There were snowdrops that would awaken through the ice on the dark days of winter, and anemones would wave gracefully, saying goodbye to the November sun. I loved that garden. Now, when I started, I was not a humble gardener. I studied books, and I gathered the seed magazines, and I planted with ambition. I was going to have great plans for this garden. I was convinced that I could get it to bloom pink and white and lavender in the spring, and then gently and magically shift to red and yellow and orange in the middle of summer. Inevitably, in the cloud of pink and purple blooms, an eager red flower would sprout before its time. Wild daisies would invade the carefully tended patterns, and so I pulled plants up. I moved them around. I dug up the daisies. I snipped the errant blooms, and for several years, I seemed to do battle with my garden rather than cultivate it. And then, in the course of one single night, in the middle of June, little green worms devoured my gracefully waving prize columbines. That's when I realized that my garden was cultivating me. That's when my garden ceased to be a battle or a chore and became my spiritual practice, because humility in the face of nature was my first lesson. Spiritual practice. My garden became my spiritual practice. Now, there's a bumpy concept, isn't it? Spiritual practice. It's not common in our UU tradition. Considering it, we can easily get caught up in the terms, trying to define them and understand their meaning. And yet, if we get caught there, I'm afraid we miss an opportunity to delve deeply into the corners of our soul. We miss the opportunity to awaken the spirit and find hope when there is darkness. See, I think many of us back away from spiritual practice because we have questions that are difficult to answer and preconceived notions about what it is. What do you mean, spiritual? How do we know if what we're doing is actually a spiritual practice? I just garden, right? How do we understand or engage traditional practices such as prayer or meditation? Can these really be for us? Is this one more thing I have to add to my to-do list in my busy life? What value could a spiritual practice possibly bring to me? I understand it's tough to embrace a concept when we have so many questions, and yet every faith tradition offers some method to pause the frenetic pace of our life and connect to the holy. And who doesn't agree that this would be helpful and desirable, no matter how we define the word holy? Spiritual practice can offer us renewal, replenishment of resources of our heart, and it can offer us hope and awakening in dark winter times. Now, there are a host of techniques for quieting the mind and listening to that still small voice inside us. These past 2 years of pandemic have left us depleted and exhausted by the complexities of our lives and decisions, and many of us may have become short-tempered, angry, and irascible. Not any of you, of course, but I can get there. Spiritual practice gives us a chance to refill our reservoirs of courage and patience and generosity. Because when our inner landscape is nourished, when the garden is lush, our capacity to hope, our capacity to love, and our capacity to serve others increases exponentially. When we are able to give from the wellspring inside of us, we can reach out to others, experience their need as our own. We can care for our world. So, how do we step forward? How do we notice the opportunities to quiet the noise and listen to the small voice inside us? Perhaps the easiest way to cultivate a spiritual practice is to pay attention to a yearning that is deep inside you. The time we set aside for our practice is separate from ordinary time. It opens our heart to the gifts of the world. We rest in the presence of nature. We accept the gifts of a favorite poet. We sit quietly and breathe. We listen to Beethoven or Gregorian chants, or we walk the dog or ride a horse into the wind. By expanding our definition of spiritual practice beyond the traditional methods, We can bypass the theological struggles and preconceived notions about what is right. We can create a sacred space we need for tending our inner garden. We can listen first to our own heart's desire and then to our heart's message. Spiritual practice is within easy reach of each of us. And here's the key. It doesn't have to be perfect. Our spiritual practice is not a race or a competition. There's no need to do battle with a spiritual practice. The word practice implies that you're practicing, right? You're not accomplishing. This is an activity not with a clear goal, but a commitment to the journey, a commitment to show up each day ready to accept what is given in the moments we choose to be close to ourselves and close to our God. It is a pursuit of oneness, not perfection. It leads to an opening to life's gifts and service to the world. Now, when I prepare to work in the garden, when I begin my spiritual practice, I have a ritual. I breathe deeply when I walk outside. I silently express gratitude to the gifts of the earth. I put on my gardening gloves slowly with intention, and then I move into a holy place. First, I walk about, checking my plants and flowers. I suspect on some level we chat with one another. And then I tend to it. Weeding, digging, deadheading. I get dirty, I get sweaty. And above all, I'm alone. I'm alone and yet deeply connected to the earth and to everything on it. I feel the connection through my fingers in the dirt. Thoughts move gently in and out of my mind, and no thoughts staying for very long. I don't force the garden anymore. I listen to it. I notice what grows easily, what needs careful tending, what needs more sunlight, what would benefit from being moved to the front, what needs clearing or thinning, what needs to be dug up by the roots and tossed away. These are such metaphors for my life, for my inner landscape. And while I don't apply all these questions to myself directly, some internal voice sort of in the background as I dig in the dirt. An amazing aspect of spiritual practice is often not the insight one gets in the moment, like a bolt of lightning, but the way Spirit or God or our own deep knowing shows up in our ordinary life. And right there next to the mundane, the holy sits. We experience divinity in the mud. And yet even the most devoted among us lets our spiritual practice grow dusty and unused. We walk away. We have great intentions. I have a friend who says she buys a new journal with intent to making it her spiritual practice every few months. She's got a big stack of journals. None of them are written in. And that's normal. It takes a while to start to get engaged. And sometimes we walk away. Perhaps we forget its restorative powers, or we make the excuse that our life is just too busy. Or maybe, just maybe, we fear the darker side of this discipline. We choose to do battle with our practice rather than knowing our own soul. You see, by committing to a spiritual practice, we must be willing to get our hands dirty. We must commit to digging deep. It may be easy to confuse spiritual practice with relaxation techniques or other activities to help us feel better, but honest spiritual practice is a commitment to personal integrity. It can be uncomfortable and challenging, maybe even painful. But from this place of radical interior exploration, change can occur. We must be willing to answer hard questions, unearth parts of ourselves that are difficult to face. We have to be willing to recognize the weeds and the invasive species that rob us of our energy and our heart. We must be willing to awaken our true self. A friend of mine once recounted a dream. In her dream, she told me she woke up and she couldn't find herself. She was frantic at this sense of disconnection. She raced about her house saying to herself, "Where am I? Where am I?" And in her dream, she heard her own voice say, "Look in the garden." And sure enough, when she looked in the garden, she found herself gently sleeping, curled among the flowers, the moon shining on her restful face. She told me after that the call of the garden became strong and deep for her. She knew it was her healing place. She could spend 30 minutes snipping spent flowers, pulling errant weeds, listening to the buzz of bees, and in those moments release her cares and hand over her well-being to nature. She noticed her breathing would slow, her body would relax, and even as she worked, a sense of rhythm took over her body, and her movements became a dance, a prayer. She found her spiritual practice in her front garden. So I encourage you to find your spiritual practice. Make this the year you commit to your inner journey. Awaken the hope that has lain dormant. Recognize the need and the value to replenish your well and know the depths of your soul. Learn to meditate, walk in nature, dance in the moonlight, and please be willing to get your hands dirty and do your homework. Because it's only when we pull up the toughest roots and prune the thickest bush that new growth will awaken in our lives. May you find hope in the mud. May you fill your well with love. May it be so. And amen.
Thank you, Reverend Tina. Please join me for extinguishing the chalice. The words are in your order of service. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. And now Reverend Tina will provide the closing words.
I'm going to close with a quote from Albert Camus, one of my favorite. "In the midst of hate, I found there was within me an invincible love. In the midst of tears, I found there was within me an invincible smile. In the midst of chaos, I found there was within me an invincible calm. I realized through it all that in the midst of winter, I found there was within me an invincible summer. May you find your summer in this dark and dreary day. May you find and awaken your hope as we step into spring." Thank you, and amen.
And now we will hear from Jeremy one last time with the postlude, Spring by Vivaldi.